Welcome to the DUSA AGM training session. So hopefully you're familiar with both Rob and myself as club support coordinators. Look, this session will probably take around 20 minutes to 30 minutes. There'll be some question time at the end, should you need to ask anything. Otherwise, as always, if you've got questions post-session, you can certainly follow up with us as need be. I'll share my screen and we'll get the presentation slide up for you to have a look at. Just let me know if that's working. Is it working on your end, Rob? Looks like it's just come up for me now.
Yeah, perfect. All good.
Perfect. Cool. So a bit of a session overview. So, things that we're going to cover today will include, planning your AGM, the step-by-step process of sort of running your AGM, the minimum requirements for affiliation to DUSA, what you need to do after your AGM, including, things like a handover as well as documentation to submit to Rob and I. And then lastly, we'll allow some time for some questions, as I mentioned earlier. So what is an AGM? So essentially it is a summary of the past 12 months since your last AGM. So it's, discussing all the happenings, so things from successes and failures. Obviously events are primarily the core function of what clubs do. So, you might be discussing what worked and what didn't work at your events, any initiatives you might have run, and just the general day-to-day operations. Think of it as the AGM as being a session to provide further detail to your member base. So they've come along, and they want to get a snapshot of what the last 12 months have been. That's effectively what an annual general meeting is all about. So, the current executive team will present an annual report. So, your president, your treasurer, secretary, and then any additional executive roles will provide a report of, their experiences within the role over the last 12 months. And look, they'll change depending on what the role is. The treasurer will obviously do a bit of a report on the finances, but they're also welcome to sort of give a snapshot into their experiences over the last 12 months as well. So it can have a little bit of that personal touch too. Another thing that the AGM will cover too is the constitutional changes that are proposed. Obviously not all clubs will propose one, but for those that do, the AGM will cover those. You get to discuss, why those changes are being proposed to your member base, and then obviously they'll be voted on. And then, the main sort of function is to then elect your new executive team for the following 12 months until the next AGM. I guess, as an order of business as well, you can start to think about, what you might want to do for the following 12 months as well. So it can be used as a little bit of an open forum discussion around potentially what your members might like to see. So you can fit that in sort of just at the end of the AGM as well.
Alrighty, so planning the AGM. So I think James and I had sent out an email maybe a week or so ago with the details of the AGM and what to plan and what to think about and what to get started on. I think there was a couple of dates in there in terms of when the AGM must be held. And I think that the last date that a AGM can be held will be the end of trimester 2. So I think it was after study week and after exams, so it was around about the end of October is when we would like all of the AGMs ideally to be completed. So in terms of the location of the AGM, it can be held online or on campus. And here we've written, we prefer it to be online just simply because it's much easier to do and probably easier to get everybody on a Zoom chat as opposed to liaising and logistically getting everybody into a room. Plus it's one less step when you're sending me in the event package for the AGM because you don't need to put in a room booking form. AGM emails in terms of when it's going to be held has to be sent 14 days prior to the schedule of the AGM. I can remember last year quite a few clubs had, which is completely fine, the absence of having it on there initially the date that they wanted to, so they rescheduled it. Rescheduling the AGM is completely fine, but it has to be 14 days notice to the members so everyone can be in the AGM at the same time. So emailing out the date's fine, plus posting on social media is okay as well. So then a follow-up AGM email has to be emailed to the members after membership roll closes. And this has to make sure it goes out to new members that have signed up to the club as well. So they should be included in all of the AGM dealings. So the agenda has to be emailed to everyone in the club 24 hours prior to the AGM being hosted. And the nominations for executive positions have to be received 3 days prior to the AGM. So if there's new positions that are going to be put into the club, then they have to be given to all the members 3 days prior. So clubs nominating or clubs holding must nominate 3 positions for all of the AGMs. And that's a returning officer. And this is a person who is not standing for an executive position. And the returning officer is basically responsible for collecting and counting the votes. Also a meeting chair, which is the facilitator of the meeting, such as a president, and a minute taker, which funnily enough records the minutes. So I, myself and James have to approve the AGM time, date, location, and any other proposed constitutional amendments before you email the AGM notice out. So basically, we have a 4-week period for all of this information to take place and be sent to myself and James, and then we go through it, send you all the important documents, and then it gets sent out to the club members. So the online platforms that we recommend for the AGM, the vast majority used Zoom. And tying into that last point on this slide, the vast majority of the votes were done through Zoom poll as well. But look, feel free to use any other voting method that you have used in the past, or one that works better for yourself or the club. So pre-registering attendees prior to the AGM also is good because it saves time. So details need to include when pre-registering people in the AGM: name, email, and student number. And an appoint an executive member responsible for checking attendances at the beginning of the AGM as well, because that would be one of the required documents that is submitted after the AGM is an attendance list. And it's important that the majority of those members have to be members on the list for the AGM to be valid.
And I guess just to tie on to your point as well, Rob, for clubs that have, sorry, we'll just get anyone to mute their mic. For clubs that have, a large member base, pre-registering attendees to the AGM is just really going to save you time. If you're having to check attendance for everyone that attends and you're getting, 80, 100, 200, whatever it might be, attend, that can really chew into the time and drag it out. And look, AGMs are not the most glamorous at the best of times. So where you can cut time and save time, we really recommend it. So pre-registering can be really handy to do that. In terms of AGM documentation, so we've got a few templates that we've developed, and post this meeting, we'll be able to send those out to you. You may, or you're likely probably already familiar with some of these documents, having already been through an AGM last year and obviously submitting some of the documentation through to Rob and I. But this includes like the notice, which Rob touched on earlier, in terms of it needing to go out 14 days prior, the agenda template needing to go out at least 24 hours prior. It can be sent out earlier. The nomination template, so that's for your executive positions, the attendance template, and the minutes template as well. So we'll flick all these templates out to you along with a DUSA AGM manual, which essentially summarizes what we're covering today. And we'll send that to you over the next day or potentially early next week. In terms of running the AGM, first thing you need to do is obviously check off all your attendees. So as I mentioned earlier, and Rob sort of touched on too, where you can pre-register, definitely don't go down that path to save yourself time. So you will need to cross-reference the attendees with your membership list and check their student IDs. So they need to be a current member of your club. If you've got non-members attending your AGM and voting, it will, it'll be deemed void, and the AGM will need to be rerun. If they are non-deacon students who are members of the club, they can attend the AGM, but they can't vote. So it's imperative that you really do appoint an executive to checking the attendance list and cross-referencing and making sure that that's correct. The second part is making sure that you're meeting quorum. So if you don't meet quorum, then the AGM is also void. So what is quorum? Quorum is 15% of your total paid members, or 15 members, whatever is lesser. I should preface this by saying this is for unincorporated clubs, which make up the bulk of DUSA clubs. We do have some incorporated clubs as well, though. For those that are incorporated, you will need to follow the guidelines as set out by your own constitution. Typically, the number does sort of hover around either 15% or 10%, but just check your own constitution. Thirdly, you can you open the meeting as the meeting chair, and list any apologies that have been sent through that can't make the meeting. Fourth of all, you then move forward to accepting the minutes from your club's last AGM. Rob and I can send you a copy of last year's AGM minutes if you don't have them on club file yourself. If you're a new club, then obviously you don't need to worry about that part. And then the sixth point there, or the fifth should be the fifth point there, is distributing the club constitution, and then considering and voting on your proposed amendments if you have any. And much of this will make a little bit more sense and look a bit more structured when you have a look at the templates as well.
Yeah, and also it makes a lot more sense when we do approve the setup of the AGM, and we send out, probably a lot of you can remember, an email that does have quite a lot of information that looks pretty much like an event package request approval email, and it does ask for specific places to be filled in that lets us know the run and the order and the returning officer and all of those things as well. So continuing on from running the AGM, so it's pretty straightforward. People who have done the AGM understand the flow of the AGMs. So it's delivering annual reports. So each of the executive members are to present a report at the AGM, a bit of a synopsis and a rundown of what has happened over the last 12 months. It can talk about anything from highlights to lowlights to improvements to suggestions. It's a report that's shared and given during the AGM. So the appointment of the returning officer is also another stage there, which leads into the voting of the executive committee, the purpose of the AGM, basically, general business, and then any other club-related business as well, and then the meeting closes. So some AGMs take 20 minutes, some AGMs take a bit longer in terms of what happens. Some clubs decide to have a bit of a party or an event after the AGM as well, so that's also something that is more than welcome to do too. And then within the AGM, in terms of the constitutional changes, there are, I think, 3 things that can be amended, or 4 things that can be amended within the club constitution. The majority of the document is concrete in terms of what can be changed, but things like the club name, the club purpose, executive roles, responsibilities, and the price of the membership can be changed. So roles and responsibilities for proposed executives, that can be defined in any way that you like. The addition of more executive positions can be made, so adding on to the president, the secretary, and the treasurer, and other roles can be done. Those 3 roles obviously cannot be changed. And in terms of anything that's going to be changed during the AGM, it has to have a majority vote of 75% or more in favour for that to be passed, and then the constitution edited with the updated changes. So voting of constitutional changes can be done via a show of hands or via a poll, depending on how comfortable people are with putting their hands up, or voting anonymously.
Yeah, so, and voting on constitutional changes, it's probably always easier done just via a show of hands or poll. It doesn't really need to go to a private ballot. You know, if you do decide you want to go down that path, that's fine. But I'd say 99% of the time, that sort of casual way of doing it is perfectly fine. In terms of voting in your, you know, your new executive team, each position is up for election at each AGM. We've touched on the theme a little bit, and you've probably seen it in past emails and last year at the same time as well, in terms of needing to be Deakin students who are current club members to be eligible to vote. So you need to be a member at least 7 days prior to the AGM, which also ties into why we say you should follow up with another AGM notice reminder email around that 7-day mark. If you get any members that sign up in between, if you send it 14 days out, the notice, then you might potentially get some members join up between that 14 days and then the 7 days. That's why we say just to send out another notice, a reminder. Proxies are not permitted, but again, if your club's incorporated, this is likely going to be different for you. So if you're a incorporated club, just check your own constitution on that. For the model DUSA constitution though, no proxies are permitted. If you've only got one person that has nominated for an executive position, then they're obviously automatically elected to that position. So in that case, you'll just need one person to move the motion and then another individual to second the motion to give it the rubber stamp. If you get more than one person nominate for the role, then the best practice is definitely to do a private vote. I know some clubs in the past have done, you know, like a show of hands, but what we do say is just to be mindful of, if you're doing a show of hands and you've got, say, Rob and I going for it, and, you know, Rob gets 20 hands and I get 2, you know, it might put me in a bit of an awkward position. So just bear that in mind. We're not saying that you can't do it, but best practice is definitely to hold a private vote, of which your returning officer can then count up the votes for the nominations. If voting is tied, which, you know, does happen from time to time, then they can just be asked to vote again between, you know, the tied individuals. In terms of voting methods, you know, touched on a few of them already. Casually, you know, it's a non-private ballot. It's a show of hands. As I said, typically we don't really recommend this method, as it, you know, can be a little bit confronting. Zoom poll though, you know, is a good casual method and pretty easy to use, and ties into, you know, running an AGM online, which we obviously you know, encourage clubs to go down that path for accessibility reasons. Otherwise, you can go through a somewhat formal method through the private ballot. So I know we've got Zoom poll again there, sort of strikes a balance between the two, but SurveyMonkey or Wufoo. Otherwise, you do have dedicated election software. Most of the time there is a cost involved with that, but I know clubs in the past, or particularly over the last 2 years with the pandemic, some have used election software, so that's worth looking into. Election Buddy and Election Runner are two off the top of my head that I can remember being used. If you're doing it on campus, then that's as simple as a names on paper, in terms of it being somewhat formal, writing names on the paper, handing it to the returning officer and them counting. Formal, we don't see too often. Sometimes by the political clubs though, they'll opt to go the preferential voting system, and also tying that into dedicated election software as well. Majority of clubs are probably going to fall in between that casual to somewhat formal method. And just lastly there, there's no need to publicly announce the number of votes that each nominee receives. So you don't have to say, you know, Rob's received 20 votes and James received 2. The returning officer can just announce that, you know, Rob's been successful in being elected to the role.
Cool. So after all the AGM has been squared away, within the next 3 weeks, the following things need to come back to me. So everything that needs to be sent back in terms of the minutes, attendance, executive reports, constitution, or sorry, not the executive reports, but the updated constitution and the affiliation will be attached to the email that we do send out. So after the AGM's completed, if everything is kind of double checked and signed and ticked off before it's sent to me, that's much appreciated, due to the fact that there are quite a lot of clubs that are submitting AGM documents within that 3 weeks. So if we can minimize the back and forth in terms of correct documents, the most up-to-date document, that's really, really appreciated as well. So the minute template in the AGM documents is pretty straightforward in terms of how it needs to be filled out. The attendance list, as we've touched on, is also pretty straightforward. The executive reports, again, they don't have to be massive essays, but just a nice synopsis of what has happened during the year. And the updated constitution, and making sure it is the updated constitution. I think off the top of my head, James, correct me if I'm wrong, it has a fifth amendment down the bottom, a fifth section down the bottom. So if you're looking at the constitutional document with a fifth section, that's the right one. If it only goes to 4, then that's an old constitution. And then the DUSA affiliation agreement, which has to be signed by the incoming president and another executive officer, and that's right down the bottom. There's always one page down the bottom of the affiliation agreement that gets missed out as well. So just make sure that's ticked off. So post AGM, after all the information has been sent over, and in terms of club structure and what the club does next, as soon as the new executive team is signed in, then they commence their duties immediately. So that's why it's really important to have a pretty robust and strong handover period, or a little session that shows the incoming executives what they need to do, or not necessarily what they need to do, but just a guide and some suggestions on how to make a good start in terms of running the club events, documents that need to be submitted for events, how the budgets and things work, just so that the club can start to be active immediately, as opposed to a little break in terms of not sure what to do or don't know where things are. So it's really good to have a strong handover process. You could even suggest giving the incoming executives a little cheat sheet in terms of a rundown of events that have happened over the last 12 months, events that have been really successful, or events that didn't work so well. That could also be some intel on some good suppliers or some venues, or just some information that they have a bit of a go-to when the new executives are looking to hold events and everything else. So other formalized things that need to be done in the handover would be the transfer of the club assets. So the online password, say for example to a ticketing system, QPay or Humanitics, email accounts, equipment and merchandise. I know the email account passwords is a no-brainer. However, there have been a lot of times that the handovers didn't include the email passwords, hence emails came into the club and weren't answered for a period of time, which wasn't good business for anyone. So the provision of the club assets, so all of the club's current property, the banners or storage tubs or items that are used at OFest, and where they're located and how they're located as well. I'm not too sure of how many of I'm pretty sure that most of the Burwood Club have been into the storeroom and see how lovely and neat and tidy it is. So yeah, preferably if it can be kept that way, that would be fantastic. So in terms of the documents, storage of the documents, where the constitution and where the affiliation agreement and the minutes are stored, so that can be easy accessed if it needs reference to. And just ask for any other information in terms of events or packages from the current executive team that may help you transition well and start running the club smoothly.
And I guess just to follow on from Rob as well, it can't be understated. A quality handover is essential, and it's really going to set clubs on their way. What we don't really want to see, and what's not ideal, but it does happen, is where clubs come back and say March and are playing catch up from that point. Maybe they don't have a password, or they don't know where certain equipment is, or they're not really sure of the process involved, with events or accessing forms or where to go to. You know, if that's what's sort of happening in March, then it can take some time to catch up. Whereas ideally, you know, that handover period as it happens, you know, directly after the AGM. So typically that's going to be around that September to, you know, November phase. You really want to give them all the information and all the knowledge that you've gained over the 12 months, and, you know, put it into even if it's a document as well as a meeting, so that they've got something to move forward with, and then potentially even spend time planning over the course of, you know, the last couple of months of this year. You know, time does slip away pretty quickly, and OFest is a really busy period, as you've all sort of seen this year. So think of it as a way of, you know, what do I wish I knew when I first started, or what didn't I have that I wish I did have when I first started.
Yeah, and on that as well, James, on that, like it's a really good point to kind of be all over it when you hit the ground running, because it's, if you have an event or two between now and T1 Fest, it does create kind of a good synergy between the club, and when the clubs do come to the try T1 Fest, it's really good to have a unified club that knows everybody, that's done things together. So it's a fantastic opportunity to put yourself out there to get new members around that T1 Fest as well. So if you're already kind of a cohesive club running really well at Fest, it does pay dividends when you're recruiting for new members, and also yeah, maybe check the emails once every fortnight or month, so you haven't missed an email from an incoming executive that's asking questions about, you know, daily business or day to day, or getting some information and or advice. So don't necessarily check emails every day, but just be mindful that questions might be coming from incoming executives on how things have been done, or some advice from our previous executives.
And look, we get, you know, some of the executives that are joining us today are obviously going to be graduating, and we get that, you know, you're moving on to the next phase or the next stage of your own lives. But, you know, where you can make it easier for those that are coming in, you know, it gets back to the whole leaving something in a better place than you found it. That's sort of the philosophy that we like execs to sort of take away and move forward with. But look, we won't sort of hammer on too much more about that. Moving into key timelines, and this is the content that Rob touched on earlier that was sent out initially, you know, with the AGM info linked to today. But essentially that's just the 1st of September being the deadline for submitting your event packages. So you've got, you know, around about a month's time to sort of organise when you want to have it and submit your AGM packages to Rob and I. And then the 20th October should be the deadline for the latest your AGM is being held. If there are special circumstances where that needs to fall beyond those dates, you can have those conversations with Rob and I, but you know, try and stick to those deadlines as much as possible. The later that it gets after T2, the harder it is for your AGM to be successful. Occasionally clubs might run an AGM and then it fail, not meet quorum, whatever the case might be, and need to run another one. The later you put it off, then the harder it is to be able to get attendance, you know, in that year. So obviously after T2 and the exams are finished, students go away, go back home. They can sometimes sort of, you know, forget about clubland for a little bit. So the earlier you can hold it while they're still around, the better.
Yeah.
All right.
Questions. The floor is open to any questions that we haven't covered or anything else that we may have missed. So yeah, does anyone have any questions?